Welcome back. You here with Goldberg. Today we have to talk about the Dark Brandon meme. For those of you who don't know, it's a very popular liberal clapback because they're carrying it, and it permeates much as AIDS does on the internet.com. The fundamental thrust of their argument is that Biden, contrary to what conservatives suggest, is aggressively taking names, he's enacting a leftist agenda, and the right wing is remanded to just going, Foxtrot Joker Bravo, let's go Brandon. I know even slightly concurring with liberals will elicit rage pilling from the audience of this video, but sometimes you have to take a step back. I said a few years, I think it was a blog post I did maybe in 2020, I said, expect a ceremonial president. Biden is just a figurehead. He is a moderate passing old white guy that could help mollify your typical center-right Republican who doesn't like Trump, or your independent voters seeing the BLM riots. They don't want to vote for Karen Bass, or not necessarily even Buddy Gugg. Maybe the moderates would. Or directly for Kamala Harris in the #1 spot. They want this old grandfatherly man who feels safe to them. But simply the fact that he is in mental or cognitive decline. I was just reading he had a brain aneurysm in the 80s or 90s, probably not the first. That does not suggest his whole staff are these incompetents who can't do anything right. In fact, there's a tendency, especially with the right-wingers, to want to believe their opponents are, on the one hand, cartoon incompetent villains, but also when those opponents are in power and are achieving things, they'll say, oh, you're Nazis, you're Stasi, you're KGB. All of those appellations are funny because they imply membership in a group that was very ruthless, efficient, and didn't abide by respect for the rules and tradition. So you ask yourself, are you really so incompetent? And this was a mistake that conservatives made with Barack the Booty Obama. So Obama came in, they had these mental breakdowns over the Constitution, we're losing the country, and they steeped themselves in this right-wing media, which didn't exactly tone that down at all. But the consequence was that the GOP and the conservatives in general never had an idea for what they wanted to present to the people. It was always, don't be Obama, be against Obama. Oh, he's going to be the next Jimmy Carter, socialist one-term president. That in of itself is really amusing because Jimmy Carter economically was very much like a lot of Republicans. He was pro-deregulation, pro-big business. Even I think he did some tax cuts as well. And so what happened is they won the midterms, but they quickly showed they had absolutely no plan for what they wanted to achieve. So come 2012, they run the moderate center-right pro-business guy, and they lose because no one wanted to vote for Romney. There was no cause. You weren't fighting for anything. It was like, yeah, we'll kind of cut taxes and maybe look at deficit reduction, which would never have occurred. And Obama, comparatively, was a lot more interesting and frankly motivating to people. Much like Trump, for a while at least, had an impressive vision. Then it just got mucked up in all this incompetent GOP quibbling and, oh yeah, let's just focus on issues most people don't actually care about. What I want to do, or although you could go back and say the 2012 election was rigged as well, which comes to my earlier point. If your opponents are complete incompetents, how do they rig a national election? But then at the same time, in 2021, they control the government of New Jersey. I guess they rigged the election against Jack Ciattarelli for that governor who has no lips, the Phil guy. But then in Virginia, where they also controlled the governments, they didn't rig it against Youngkin. Why? Oh, I guess you just had to give a bone to people so they still believe in the system. But again, if you think the entire system is rigged, why do you celebrate when a Republican wins? Right? Why are you like anticipating a Republican victory in the midterms if you believe the system is a complete scam? It's just kind of funny. But let's get into really the bulk of this video, which is what has Biden actually accomplished, and to what extent can we say this Dark Brandon meme is true? So in April 2021, Schumer gets the Senate parliamentarian McDonough to agree that you can use reconciliation more than just a few times. They basically expanded the acceptability of reconciliation. That is a simple majority vote in the Senate on certain legislation or spending. This is something the Republicans never bothered doing, even though it would have helped them greatly. Like they could have enacted, they could have done like a very moderate Obamacare repeal, even let's just take away the taxes and the mandate, They could have gotten that through so they had a political victory to go and campaign on instead of just giving it up as soon as it got difficult. So they used reconciliation for tax cuts, but that pretty much was the end of their whole waltz down Rosemary Lane. And they would never even thought of talking to the Senate parliamentarian, because when you have all this disdain for the government, you have a tendency to be disinterested in how it works. Democrats, because they're not completely anti-government, they understand state power. They're like, okay, how can we achieve our agenda? We'll be flexible. And by the way, if the parliamentarian doesn't agree with you, let's say on funding the border wall, fire her ass and get someone who's a shill and does what you want. That's, again, being creative instead of just saying we have to conserve the institution. So what happens under Biden? Well, you get the American Rescue Plan passed 50-49 in the Senate, 1.9 trillion worth of spending, if not more. Then later on, they do the Juneteenth to mollify BLM and, of course, give federal workers another holiday. So that's a positive, I suppose. And they start working on the infrastructure bill. That, by the way, is something which could have been passed using just reconciliation. They ultimately got GOP people to back them as essentially, hey, do you want to be on board and take credit or not? The GOP could have done the same thing with Trump. They could have used reconciliation and passed an infrastructure legislation, which would have very likely padded against the pandemic. Because if these projects had started 2019, 2020, you have a lot of outdoor construction, much harder to shut it down. So there's a very good chance the economy wouldn't have been as damaged, and it would have given Trump another thing to campaign on. Look what I accomplished. Instead, they, oh, we can't do that if we don't get 60 votes. So it shows a lack of creativity on the part of Republicans. They passed this infrastructure bill, which took some time, and you go, oh, the inflation, the projects aren't working. Some of them will work, but the point is, in the mind of the normie, stuff is getting done. It's being achieved. Whereas on the flip side, it's like, oh, okay, let's do nothing and let's essentially bicker for years and get wrapped up in these silly investigations, which are self-inflicted to some extent, because if your own people are like appointing special counsels, you're wasting time. Now, in the fall, Brandon, even though you have the debacle in Afghanistan, which did hurt him, he does the pincushion mandate. Oh, he's a dictator. Now, this is the conservative Supreme Court in the cowardly conservative institutionalist fashion that they follow. They didn't issue an emergency stay order and block this thing. They just let it work its way up. So at the end, tens of millions of people who hated Biden bent over and pulled down their pants to save their jobs, right? And so you say, even though he was supposedly slapped down in January, did he really lose? No, he massively expanded executive power. He got a lot of what he wanted, which was he made these dudes, these, oh, don't tread on me, libertarian conservative dudes who went ahead and got the pincushion to save their jobs. You guys all belong to a group, and it's called Biden's bitches. And I'm not saying that to insult you. I know many people had bills to pay. They have family. I'm just pointing out he was successful. It doesn't matter he got blocked. He was successful. You can't take the injection out of you at this point. So yes, that was honestly a masterstroke. And I think whether you agree with it or not, it was successful in terms of the expansion of power. It's also worth noting that the Supreme Court backed him on the Medicare facilities. And I believe even the courts were on his side when it came to the Navy mandate. I'm not entirely certain on that. But regardless, 2022 chugs along. And even though the Build Back Better legislation failed due to Joe Manchin saying it was too expensive, for the Republicans, it's over. The Biden agenda is dead until the midterms. For the Democrats, it's, okay, what's your price? And they keep negotiating, they negotiate. Now, this is actually really interesting. They were able to screw over Mitch McConnell because he said, we're not going to give you votes for this CHIPS Act, the subsidy of the semiconductor industry. We're not going to do that if you go for climate change. Well, they just basically pulled a fast one and did it right after Republicans supported the CHIPS Act. And once more, you see that the Democrats are aggressively pursuing an agenda and a vision. You might not like the vision. Ro Khanna saying we're going to be the first multi-ethnic, multiracial global power, which is cringe as hell, but we can tell why he's saying that. They are going after it. Well, eventually Manchin, They find his price and he flips, and now you got this Inflation Reduction Act. No, it's not going to reduce inflation. But for the normie, it's like, oh, wow, stuff's getting done. Oh, climate change. It's playing to the Democratic base, which even Obama wasn't very successful on green energy. All this money, as much as it's inflationary, will go and it will boost the economy in some way. You know, all these people, oh, I got a tax credit for my electric car. Yay. So the Democrats are making investments that could potentially pay off before 2024. Even if you don't agree with the essence of it, even if you think it's not going to be that big of a deal, you can't deny that there is some impact. And they are showing that they can get stuff done, which again, to the normie, to the independent voter who's not conspiratorial, that means, okay, yeah, you know, these people they're competent at some level. And I don't think it's over yet. I believe that Biden is going to get one more major legislative victory before the end of the year, regardless of the outcome of the midterms. This will be the federal codification of homosexual marriage, which is almost unheard of when we consider GOP position just 10 years ago. But you start looking at the numbers. You have Portman and Toomey that are retiring. They'll very likely vote for it. Murkowski, Collins. I suggest Lindsey Graham for obvious reasons. Mitt Romney. I've heard Tom Tillis, John Thune, Ron Johnson, potentially one of those clowns or simps from Indiana. So they could probably hit 60, 61 votes to do homosexual marriage, which would suggest that, oh, the woke left is just crashing and burning. No, they seem to be actually advancing. In a weird way, the ruling on abortion may have actually fueled a different outcome in the midterms, or at least the blunting of the effect, regardless of the economy. It's hard to say. Now, I just wanted to point out here real quick, look at these women right here. You can just hear, you know, in the distance the slow and mournful sobbing of the PUAs who realize they can't even get a woman as good as one of these lesbians can. So it's an interesting perspective. But what I'm saying is that, you know, just because you keep hammering on, oh, they're incompetent, they're destroying everything, does not mean they are failing to pursue some kind of agenda. And you see that the the gas prices are coming down a little bit because they open up the special reserve. That might not be enough. The inflation could still hit bad. There might be these famines and these droughts people are talking about. So we'll see in the next 6 months. But with all these incompetent GOP Senate candidates, they might lose the Senate. And then you might have the House. But what are you going to do? We'll talk about that in just a second, because there's one big item that we still have to cover in this Dark Brandon meme. The raid on Mar-a-Lago. Now people go, oh, Nazis, KGB, Stasi. But once more, they are using the legal system to destroy their enemies. And it's really fascinating because people keep saying, oh, it's a hoax, nothing's going to happen from it. But think about it for a second. Let's just be brutally honest. If you can get people with 90-day prison sentences for trespassing, you had the guy who was probably on marijuana with the buffalo helmets, got almost 4 years in prison for being a clown. Don't you think they can probably get Trump on something? Yes. He's said enough stuff that is suspect, at least under the terms of legal society. So he's going to be indicted and almost certainly convicted. And if they can get him 3 years in prison, right, that would put him out of the running for 2024. I don't know if you can run for president if you're incarcerated. I assume not. I don't know if you can even be on the ballot if you're a felon. I'd have to do more research into that. The point being, they are ruthless, and they are using the law in the way that the conservatives never did. You remember when he said lock her up, and then there was a rally after he won, and he goes, oh, we weren't really serious about that. Well, the Democrats are, and they're using it effectively to neutralize a threat. Not to say that Trump, I always thought he was more or less controlled opposition because, let's be real, look at who he surrounds himself with. But still, they don't want him coming back, and they're going to try to put him in prison so he can't. That is like a pretty aggressive use of power. And failure to realize that just means that you're going to have, you could very well end up in like 2023 with this void if he can't run for president. Possibly DeSantis will fulfill it. DeSantis seems a little bit competent, although I attribute that more to the Florida legislature because DeSantis was more of a, you know, kosher conservative for a long time. it's just the point that you can't make all these assumptions that just because a guy appears to be mentally incompetent, that everyone else is around him. And that's what you're seeing with people who oppose Biden. Look at what the GOP has done. Dr. Oz, who Trump endorsed, even though he's obviously a shill plant. Herschel Walker is a moron, and he's probably going to go down in flames. Even J.D. Vance is struggling. So if they don't win the Senate, they might win the House, but what are they going to put forward that's going to make them compelling in 2024? This was interesting. Chris Sununu, they were trying to get him to run for Senate, and he said to them, what do you want to do when we win? And they're like, nothing, just wait till 2024. So essentially 2014, they win, and they just want to wait till 2017, hope that they have the presidency. So that does not give people a reason to vote for you. Now, of course, the inflation, the shortages, that might still help them with some gains, but it's not a guarantee that they're going to win the Senate, and it's certainly not a guarantee that they're going to win the presidency. You have to have more than just, we're against them, or they're clowns, they're terrible, because if they keep working dutifully, like the tortoise versus the hare, well, you might just end up with an egg in your face, realizing that you've lost because people don't want to vote for you. You have nothing to offer.